Let's talk about layers of technology here. You probably have seen this chart or some variation of it. This is a technology stack. From the very bottom, where you have hardware, and then above which you have firmware, above which you have operating system, above which you have application. These layers, especially the top four, these are softwares. This requires code to write. Either you have a high level or low level language code. The software, right, need to talk to the hardware. So hardware in this case is your bare hardware metals that constitutes what the hardware is. When you kind of get into the hardware, there's motherboard, there's processor that supports different calculation circuits. And these circuits are actually what we call processors. They're meant to process, right, or execute a list of desired calculations based on instructions that you give it. There's also part of the hardware memory, the memory chips. Very high level is just a circuit that store a whole bunch of zeros and ones in each of a series of thousands of addressable locations. That's hardware. Firmware generally probably have heard the term called drivers. Firmware is responsible as a glue and it sits between your operating system and hardware. It transfers hardware instructions back to the operating system, and the operating system then takes what it needs to communicate back to the firmware, which then goes back to hardware. Let's say if you just purchased a printer, you have to install a driver. And that driver is basically sitting in between this operating system and hardware that communicates your printing instruction. So, what is an operating system? Operating system is basically a system software that manages a whole slew of computer hardware, your keyboard, your mouse, your speakers, so on and so forth, a whole bunch of software resources. These resources could be a collection of data, right, sitting inside the computing queue. It could be multiple threads inside a thread pool or multiple processes or processors, so to speak, that are distinct from threads. The operating system provides common services for computer programs. One example of operating system is your Windows software. Mac, we have different version of operating system. There's Linux operating system OS that's responsible for doing all that. So your application is your software application. So your apps, your Chrome browser is an app. Your messaging tool, your Slack is an app. Your browser application like Canvas, it's a web app. There's a lot of these applications that sits on top of the operating system. For the purpose of this class, we are talking about C++. And C++ being a high level programming language, it's responsible for creating these applications. Okay, so I hope this is clear. C++ being versatile can also be used to create operating system, softwares. In fact, there's also firmwares out there that makes use of C++. One of the example is Arduino. There's C++ enable Arduinos out there. If you ever worked for a hard drive company or a semiconductor company, will you be talking about firmwares? And these are video chips, NVIDIA, the company produces, or Advanced Microsystem, AMD produces, or Intel even. If you ever work for a hard drive company like Western Digital, Seagate, you'd be writing C++ code or even C codes on the firmware level too. This is a brief overview of layers of technologies.